All right. Well, thank you for that, Maureen. I really appreciate it. And it's so great to see all of my pals from the last couple of years here from the seminar. I was thinking that it's a little daunting to talk about mentoring to a group of mentoring experts because I can't fake it. I can't sneak any stuff in that I just think. So I'm going to have to be evidence-based here for you. I want to begin by just kind of giving you a sense of what we're going to be looking at here in this conference. And it's really pretty exciting. On the plane today, I was looking at all the stuff on the conference itinerary and thinking there's going to be a lot of interesting things. So for mentees, that's one of the things our seminar teams have been looking at. What's going on with mentees at the undergrad level? So we're going to hear about salient best practices from a mentee's perspective. One group's going to talk about that. We're going to hear about underrepresented groups in terms of mentee experience. How about building mentee tenacity? I don't know who's doing that, but I'm going to that one. That one looks really cool. Social capital, identity formation for mentees. And then what about mentors? We've got a group that is going to tell us about salient best practices of mentors. We're going to hear about award-winning mentors. How about preparing future mentors? A few of my comments today are going to have to do with who's really got the makings of terrific mentorship, and how do we choose those folks? And so I think it's an important question. Where does mentoring fit into one's developing career? That's an interesting sort of developmental question for faculty. So we're going to hear about that. Models of mentoring we're going to hear a bit about. So institutional programs, we're going to hear about fellows programs, some interesting programmatic things. And then last but not least, undergrad mentors. We're going to hear a bit about leaders and what leaders need to know. So what about the motivational sorts of barriers to being a good mentor? What are the costs associated with that? And then how do you support this? How are you going to support your faculty who are doing great work? So I do want to just make a comment about this acronym. This is a seminar on excellence in undergraduate research mentoring. And during the first summer here, we realized, it's a little broader. It's not just research in sort of the empirical sense. So we want to think about mentoring students in scholarship more broadly. Remember the humanities. We want to think about arts and music and other areas where faculty are mentoring. So here's the acronym. It's very unfortunate. It's ERSQA. I'm sorry about that. And so one of my challenges for you over the next 24 hours, if any of you can come up with an acronym that's more pleasing to the auditory palate, I will really appreciate it. So for now, it's the acronym that shall not be named, but that's what we have. I guess I was thinking we're going to be heading down to the poster session, and if you haven't been in this great room where the poster session is, it's very much kind of Hogwarts-like, and I've always wanted to be Dumbledore, so I thought one of the things I get to do is just sort of say, let the mentoring feast begin for this conference. And so a lot of interesting things on the palette. We're going to really kind of get into that in the next 24 hours, so this is really a way to kick things off. I do, now if you look in any of the literature in organizations and business and certainly in education, people are talking about mentoring. And I think college students more and more are maybe coming to college with an expectation that some mentoring will happen. We're going to look at some literature that calls that into question in terms of whether it actually does happen. But I think more and more mentors are wondering, or mentees are wondering, am I going to have a mentor and why do I need one? And so I want to address that in these early comments to you and just talk a little bit about what we know. What do we know so far about mentoring? And a lot of our research teams have really kind of contributed to this over the last couple of years. There was the Boyer Commission, many of you are familiar with, and one of the things Boyer concluded was that students who participate in undergraduate, mentored undergraduate research experiences are more confident researchers, are better able to digest research and then sort of apply it. They're better communicators, and they have a better sense of where they want to go. And mentoring seems to contribute to all of those things. When you dig down a little deeper into the mentoring research, specifically with undergrads, you find some very, very consistent outcomes. Excuse me. Mentored students just do better. You'll find an actual correlation with GPA and academic performance for people who report being mentored. You'll find mentees reporting very clear and more elevated expectations for what they're going to achieve and what they're going to do in college. Many deans and provosts and presidents are concerned about attrition, of course, and we find that mentored students tend to hang in there. They stay to graduation, and they have a stronger bond with the institution. So if you're a college president concerned about donations, mentoring might be one of the ingredients in creating a fairly loyal group of alumni. They're more engaged with their profession down the road. That can mean being involved in professional organizations, taking leadership roles. They have a stronger sense of identity. They produce more. And this often comes in the form of collaborative papers and publications with faculty, but you find a very clear kind of connection here. If any of you are interested in career eminence, so talk about the Nobel Prize. Harriet Zuckerman did a really interesting study of Nobel Prize laureates and found that in the sciences, American Nobel laureates, roughly half had been mentored by a prior Nobel laureate. And she describes it as a process of social heredity. You know, that's really where kind of greatness in one's field gets transmitted and passed on, often in a really connected mentoring relationship. And then, not least, well-mentored students, it turns out, end up doing more mentoring themselves, both with other students, peer mentors, and later on in their career. So they're more likely to be active mentors, and that matters for us. The National Science Foundation is concluded, after looking at much of this literature, that mentoring is not only great writ large, it's especially important for people of color, for women, for first-generation college students, for people that may be power disadvantaged in different ways. And so mentoring also levels the playing field in different ways in terms of culture. Let's start with a definition. I think we always need to put a flag in the ground and talk about what we mean by the term and the main focus of this conference, so mentoring. And I'll just offer a brief definition here. Mentoring is really first and foremost a relationship, and I think you're going to see most of my comments tonight addressing the relationship aspect of mentoring. And we'll talk about the nuts and bolts, but we want to remember the relationship. And the mentor does a number of things, and I'm going to share a few of those with you, a number of career functions, a number of psychosocial functions. And often it's a more experienced person. Certainly you see that with faculty. There are many mentorships that are between peers, or occasionally someone's mentor may be a little younger, and you find that often in graduate students coming back maybe after a prior career, or even undergrad students. So usually it's somebody more seasoned in the field. So one of the things that comes up is this question, and I think we have to wrestle with this one a bit honestly. What about advising? What about research supervision? Those are other terms we use. I just want to plant another flag, and I want to suggest to you that being an advisor has nothing to do with being a mentor, and that you may, if you're advising a student, end up developing a mentoring relationship with them. You may not. And we're going to look at some unfortunate data from a large group of recent undergrads that would suggest that most often, an advisor doesn't become a mentor, at least from the perspective of the student. And I think we can maybe conclude the same with research supervision. Some of those relationships will become very connected mentorships, others will not. And so when you're thinking about, well, what's the difference between mentoring and advising and research supervision, I want to suggest to you, and I'm planting another flag here, we're talking about a quality of relationship. We're not talking usually about a different kind of relationship. We're talking about a relationship with a student that's moved farther down a certain continuum, relational continuum. I've become more bonded trust is developed, I've become more committed to that student, and before long, we've got a more engaged relationship. And I just want to suggest that's not going to happen in every relationship you have with a student, and I think we have to be honest about that. I think the data supports that. And then, I think if you look at the literature, one of the frustrating things our research team has experienced in the last couple of years is that often people don't define these terms very differently. So sometimes you're really looking at a study about advising or research supervision. It really has little to do with mentoring, but mentoring is right there in the title, and that's part of the confusion I think we have with the field. So I've distilled, just to kind of get you thinking a little bit, my thinking, and I think thinking that is consistent with the evidence in the literature about what makes mentoring a bit unique. So when a relationship begins to take on more mentoring qualities or characteristics, what are those? And I think these are some that really stand out. Over time, this relationship becomes more mutual and collegial, collaborative. Often, an advising or supervisory relationship starts out very hierarchical. I'm going to tell you what to do, and you do it. And we have some very defined roles. You turn in your assignments. I'm going to evaluate you. Occasionally, when a relationship is really positive, it becomes more collegial. And interesting surveys of mentees, they'll tell you, one of the things that made a real difference for me was when my mentor started treating me like a junior colleague. It let me know that I had arrived in some way. I knew that I was really kind of garnering some respect from my mentor, and that really mattered for me. A mentor begins to really deliver both career advice and the psychosocial. So how are you doing? I check in with you. I'm concerned about your life beyond just the classroom or the research project. So I'm concerned about you writ large. I want you to do well in your career and certainly in your research, but I have broader interests in you. I start to become a bit more deliberate about role modeling. When I really enter into a mentoring quality sort of relationship, I'm often very deliberate about making sure my mentees get to watch me do things, and I'll invite them to do that, and they'll become sort of part of my typical work activity. Usually these relationships, from the mentee's perspective again, will become a safe place, however you define that. As trust develops, as a working alliance develops, I feel like I can trust you as my mentor to share some things about what I'm going through, maybe share some real ambivalence about even being in college or, other identity kinds of things that might be going on. This becomes a place where I can do that. And a mentor, I think, really has to take that part of his or her role seriously. I become interested in a transformation of my mentee's identity. I do want them to see themselves more as a very capable junior colleague, and I'm going to work to do the kind of affirmation that's often required for them to do that. And then don't be shocked when these relationships continue long term. Think about if some of you in this room have had a really terrific mentor experience during your own education, and that person's still alive. Is that somebody you could call up tomorrow if something big came up or you needed something? And often the answer is yes. Even if we don't talk for years, I feel connected to my mentors, and there's some kind of ongoing relationship. I was involved in a study of retired living Navy admirals a number of years ago, and we asked them, did you have a mentor? Sure enough, almost all of them did. And we asked them, when did it end? And the most common answer was, he died. He eventually passed away. That went 20 years, 30 years. We didn't talk all the time. We were stationed in different places, didn't see each other. But I just had a sense that he was in my corner. It was almost always a male admiral. So we're talking about all the terrific things related to mentoring and why this should happen a lot and why it's so important. And I think we all agree about that. Now we got to look at the sobering evidence. So last year at this time, we were talking about this brand new study that had just come out, the Gallup Foundation study. 30,000 undergraduates were surveyed, all recent college graduates. And one of the questions, or a couple of the questions, had much to do with mentoring. And you can see this. So 30,000 students, only 22% said they had a mentor who encouraged them to pursue their goals or dreams. maybe even more heartrending, only 27% thought their professors cared about them at all. So this doesn't jibe, I think, very nicely with our sense that we're doing a lot of mentoring at the undergrad level. I think that's maybe not happening as much as we would like it to. All the more reason for us to be here today talking about this. Interestingly, in response, it was kind of fascinating to watch what was going on at Purdue University when the data came out. Apparently, the Purdue numbers were especially not so impressive. And so I don't know if it was the college president or the provost, somebody at Purdue who had the authority to do it, said, okay, what this means is from now on, starting right away, when faculty come up for promotion and tenure, part of the assessment of whether they get tenure is, are you really engaged as a mentor to undergraduate students? Sounds kind of reasonable, that you would show some evidence that you were fairly effective as a mentor to undergrads. It didn't go so well with the faculty when they saw this. They didn't appreciate it for some reason. And I think there were probably lots of reasons for that. It did sound a little bit to the cynical outsider, like their faculty were stamping their feet saying, how dare you make us have caring relationships with undergrads? And I know that's not the whole story. But I think that moment, and just watching what was going on at Purdue clues us in a little bit in terms of where we are. And one of the questions it raises is, how are we rewarding faculty? And I served not long ago 4 years on the Naval Academy's Promotion and Tenure Committee. And when we would hear that a budding assistant professor was a really good mentor, around the table as we were discussing it, I think the modal response was, well, that's nice. That's really nice. But if they weren't publishing and if they weren't getting terrific teaching evals, forget it. It wasn't going to help you. So it tells you, I think we have some cultural work to do in terms of where the rewards lie. All right. Here are some obstacles. I think there are probably many more, but I'll throw out a few of them. We've discussed these. Laura Lunsford and Vicki Baker have written about the costs of mentoring recently, and there are a number of them. And I think one of the big issues here is the reward system in higher ed. It certainly does not specifically reward mentoring, or if that happens, it's fairly rare. I think that's safe to say. Sometimes departments are competitive and faculty are competitive with one another, and they don't get along. There's a lack of collegiality. I know that's not true in any of your institutions, but you may have kind of a sense that, new students, maybe new prospective mentees have to choose a tribe when they come into our major, our department, and we won't commit to them until we know who they're with. And I think that can be a fairly destructive influence on mentoring. Sometimes programs and departments are just too large. There are too many students for faculty, and that makes it harder. There are more part-time faculty. All of these things, I think, make it tough to have cultures where mentoring is endemic, and you see a lot of this going on. So I was thinking about how I would say something about the elements of mentoring or what terrific mentors do, and I wanted to have a little time for that. And then I remembered that one of the teams from this seminar actually had just written something on this topic, and so I want to use their terrific article as sort of a springboard to just mention a few things, and again, get you thinking a bit about what terrific mentors do. So one of our groups looked at a literature review of all the evidence on what very effective mentors do at the undergrad level. So I'll just go through some of these. One, mentors are really kind of deliberate and thoughtful in terms of sort of planning the experience and thinking individually, what does this mentee need? I think this is one of the reasons it's hard work and it's resource heavy. If I'm a really great mentor, maybe a research mentor to undergrads, it can't be a one-size-fits-all model all the time. I need to know where my mentees are individually, developmentally. They're going to approach me with different needs, and I need to be able to meet them where they are, and terrific mentors find a way to do that. I am thoughtful, especially at the beginning of the relationship, about clarifying expectations, talking about boundaries. What do I expect from you and vice versa? And I make that fairly clear And I think of this as a clinical psychologist. I think of this as informed consent. I make sure my students can give informed consent about what they're about to embark on with me as far as an experience in research, and I want to make sure that's very clear. How about teaching, very specific elements of doing research or scholarship? Part of this involves role modeling. I'm going to show you how I do it. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the skills. I want you to be involved with me then in all the facets of doing research. You can see how it looks. You can come to a conference. You can watch me in all phases of this activity. So I'm not going to forget to teach you what you need to know. How about making sure that I'm actually in touch with how you're doing? I want to be in touch with your skill level and how you're developing as a scholar. I also want to know how you're doing, and I want to check in with you. Again, those emotional functions that Kathy Cram talked about. The career is very important. The technical stuff is very important. I have to do that, but I got to know you as an individual, and I think I have an obligation to check in, be a friend, be a colleague, create that safe space, and maybe help develop trust in the relationship. How about this? Building a sort of collegial community through my mentoring activities. And I don't know how many of you in the room are very deliberate about having research teams. But I think this is a really nice way to kind of get at this one. How can I have an integrated team that maybe involves students at different levels of development and integrate them in? Maybe there's some undergrads. If I'm at an institution with graduate students, could I bring them in? Maybe a postdoc, maybe even a junior faculty member. But we're developing a community. And I think when that happens, I'm teaching some communitarian sort of collegiality kinds of skills, and I can do that through the mechanism of research. How about dedicating one-on-one time individually? This is intensive work on your part. I know you're all busy. I'm going to do my research team meetings, and then I also need to meet with my students on their own. Not easy to do. I want you to kind of titrate up the amount of responsibility students have. So they'll start maybe doing some fairly basic things, and I want to find a way to integrate them in more and more. I don't know how many of you worked with undergrads at conferences. Any of you have the experience of an undergrad that doesn't want to present at a conference, who's socially phobic? We can all remember some of those experiences. Well, so you need to titrate them in. Let's do a poster together initially, and then we're going to do a presentation. We'll do it together, and I'll have you just do this part of it. And then, guess what? You're going to be up on the podium, and I'll be there nodding at you like George Koo is for me right now. And I'm going to... That's right. And then I am going to I'm going to, be cheerleading for you. And what's the worst that can happen? Well, projectile vomiting and passing out. But I think you're going to be fine, and I'm in your corner, and I'm going to be there for you. How about supporting their development through connecting students to your own network? Terrific mentors do this. They sponsor, they open doors, they network. They make sure students are tied in. They look for opportunities. Once I have a sense of where you want to go, I'm kind of vigilant for opportunities I might create for you that would nicely fit into that career trajectory. A couple more here. How about creating leadership opportunities for your mentees deliberately? I think that's a really interesting idea. So I've got this research team. I got a student going into a second or third year of this experience. Could I start having them take leadership for the team and start titrating that up again? So they're starting to get some real leadership. Talk about developing their sense of competence and collegiality. If they can really take some leadership in the research enterprise, that's terrific. And then last, encourage students to have these moments where they get to do some dissemination, publication, presentation, other things. So I like these 10. I think if you had kind of 10 things that terrific research mentors do, this is a nice place for us to start. I want to add a couple more. And these are two that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I just would like to kind of commend them to you as things you might want to ponder a little bit. So Belle Reagans has been writing some really interesting stuff. Belle Rose Reagans is a luminary in the mentoring field, and she's been writing some things that I resonate with. She's come up with this notion of the relational skill sort of cache that comes from a good mentoring relationship. And Reagan says that if I'm somebody with pretty good EQ and relationship skills and I'm committed to my mentee, one of the things I'm doing when I'm mentoring is passing on a set of good relational skills to my mentee. I'm modeling that for them. I'm showing them how to do that and how to be collegial. And when you do that, Reagans would say that you're actually arming them with the relational skills they're going to need to be very successful as they move forward. And I think that's a nice kind of part of mentoring, and I want to just kind of encourage you to think about that a little bit. That might change, who you as an academic leader decide to have be a mentor, I suppose. You'd have to have that conversation. But creating a relational cache, I think, is very interesting. And then before I have you engage in a little experience here, I want to bring us back to someone we haven't talked enough about, I think, in recent years, and that is a developmental psychologist, Levinson. Levinson's theory of adult development has been very influential. Levinson, you may remember, wrote the book Seasons of a Man's Life, Seasons of a Woman's Life. One of the things Levinson says is that a major task of early adulthood is to develop a dream. He calls it a dream, and I think that's a nice sort of term for it. What that would mean is your fledgling college students that you're working with in scholarship supervision of some sort are sort of working to kind of think about, who do I want to be? If I sort of imagine the best possible life and career outcome for me, what would that look like? And remember, these are young folks, or they're early adults. This may not be clear to them. And Levinson's model suggests that a really terrific mentor helps the mentee figure this out a little bit. I want to help you through our relationship and creating a safe space and giving you permission and asking you the right Socratic questions at the right moment, help you to begin to articulate, what's the dream look like for you? And then I want to champion that. Once we figure out what it is, I want to champion it. I was reading I don't know if you've read Stephen King's book On Writing, where the novelist talks about how he writes. And I was struck with the fact that when he's writing a novel, he does no planning, no outlining at all. And I've thought I could never do that. But he says, no, for me, writing a novel is really kind of archaeology. I kind of just, my job is to unearth the story. I just kind of follow the leads and figure it out. That's sort of what I imagine a terrific mentor does. It's a bit like archaeology. I'm working with a student to help them sort of unearth and articulate what the dream might look like. And then I don't laugh at them, and I'm affirming, and I find ways to then create opportunities for them to move in that direction. All right. So I thought that this wouldn't be a very fun mentoring conference if you didn't get to do just a tiny bit of mentoring. And so I'm going to ask you to do something that might seem kind of weird to you, but it's speed mentoring. And I'm only going to give you 2 minutes to do this. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, I've just talked about the dream, and I'm going to ask you in 1 minute just to jump up and look around the room, because there are, I'm guessing, a number of people you don't know. I'd like you to pick someone you don't know and just go find them. It's like speed dating, but not creepy, like speed dating would be. And once you find somebody, I'm going to say go, and I'm only going to give you about 1.5 minutes. And I'd like you to ask that person, tell me right now at this moment, even though many of us are more seasoned and grayer in the room, what does your career dream look like? And if you're at the tail end of your career, it might look like real estate or romance novels or something else. That's fine. And I'd like you to then, as a mentor, be affirming of that and say, okay, how are you going to get there? And you only have 1.5 minutes to ask them about that, and then offer something very affirming, okay? And then after 1.5 minutes, I'm going to have you switch, okay? So it's a 3-minute exercise, 20 seconds to find someone, so go ahead right now, and then I'll tell you when to go. So here's something I would encourage you to think about. many of us don't get mentored like this much anymore now that we're well beyond undergrad. So I'll just encourage you, if that was kind of fun, look for that person again during the conference and to continue the conversation over coffee. And this could be kind of a nice moment where you just end up having kind of a nice collegial mentoring experience as part of the conference. Okay. I want to just wrap up with a few lingering mysteries and things about mentoring that are a little less clear, but I just want to encourage us to percolate about a little bit as we're here. I've mentioned this in my earlier comments, but I think we have to think about the who. We have to think about who makes for good mentors, and I don't think we think about this enough. I got to be honest with you. I just don't think we're quite honest enough with one another about this. I have had the experience as I've traveled around of just encountering people that I think, I just wouldn't want to see you mentoring. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't want to. And I think it's fair. I think it's fair and honest to say that. And I think sometimes those people know they shouldn't be mentoring, and other times they don't. And I think that's the real challenge group often for an academic leader. I think mentoring requires some skills and it requires some competencies, and I'll just share with you a couple that I thought about. Oh, and by the way, we want to avoid the tormentor. Yeah, sorry, I thought you wanted a tormentor. One of the things about mentoring in academe is that once you're a faculty member and students start coming your way, these are relationships that happen entirely in private often. Nobody sees if you're abusive or inappropriate or negligent in the mentor role. And that really puts a little more pressure on all of us to kind of be aware of what's going on and who's mentoring. I think it's an erroneous assumption to assume that anyone who has a doctorate can mentor folks. And I think we have to kind of think about, well, then what are the ingredients? And we should think about this when we're hiring people. I would prefer that we do it at that moment, not later on when there are problems. Here are just a few things I thought about years ago. I had kind of a triangular model. I think that there are some virtues that terrific mentors have. They're caring, they're prudent, they have integrity. I would like to see those things. I think there are also some abilities, and I don't think these are things we teach people once they're adults. So I don't think we teach EQ very well, or emotional intelligence and communication skills. I think some people just don't have that in their spectrum of skills. Now, they may be wonderful, wonderful scientists, for example, and yet not be very good in relationships. And I think we just have to acknowledge that and maybe find other things that they can do. And then, of course, we have all the micro competencies. And as Schwarzkopf said, if mentoring is a combination of strategy and character, give me character. I would rather have that. By the way, I just swiped his quote. It was on leadership, but I put mentorship in because I think it's kind of the same idea for me. So here, just a couple comments about terrific things that mentees will tell you when they're describing their really good mentors. These are some of the things they talk about. And you see this in the literature, not just in education, but you see it in other studies. And these are fairly consistent. So warmth, patience, who wouldn't want that in a mentor? Communication skills, a caring orientation. I seem to really enjoy seeing you and kind of finding out how you're doing. Certainly they're ethical, good role models for their profession. They're accessible. I don't know if this one is a challenge for some of you. We know the literature on college professors suggests they're very introverted in terms of personality. So running off to find someone to mentor is often not what they think about when they get to work in the morning. This may be harder for them. I think I shared with the group in the seminar, I had a professor who was just terrific as a teacher when I was in college. We all wanted to talk to him. He was so interesting. And you'd go to his door, and his colleagues knew him so well, they'd given him a placemat for outside his door. So you'd be about to knock and look down, and it said, "Is this visit really necessary?" and it just so defined him as a profound introvert. And so I would say, let's not have him mentor. He's not a good, I think it's going to be a challenge for him. Okay, and I think some of these others are straightforward. I want to just give a nod to the whole idea of collegiality and communitarianism. I don't think we talk about this enough in academe, but the whole notion that for me comes from Ubuntu African philosophy, that I'm really only somebody and I'm really only competent and I'm really kind of okay through colleagues, through other people who know me and care about me. And I just sort of challenge all of us in the room to kind of think about how we model those things to people we're mentoring, our undergrad students. This is the place it would begin. If they're going to sort of understand collegiality that way, I think it happens first in a mentoring relationship with a faculty member. And a couple things about multiculturalism, and I'll wrap up here. So a couple things about race and gender, what we know, what we don't know. There's often, some misunderstanding that I can't mentor someone who might be culturally different in some area because I'm not competent to do that, and they wouldn't want me to be their mentor anyway. And so what you have is this real disconnect between people who are culturally different. Maybe it's race, gender, sexual orientation, any variable. I tend to avoid them. And you do find lower rates of initiating mentoring relationships across culture. What you find when you look more carefully is when those relationships get started, they're just as effective as same culture relationships. So our challenge is, how do we get faculty members who may be majority group in some way to initiate relationships? And I think that's a challenge for all of us to kind of think through. Thomas's famous study at Harvard about, well, do we have to talk about our racial difference directly, or can we not talk about it? His study showed it really didn't matter as long as mentor and mentee agreed, as long as we're sort of on the same page with how we prefer to handle our cultural difference, then the relationship seemed to go very well. I also just want to commend to you the notion of cultural humility when it comes to mentoring. I think I have seen, as a clinical psychologist doing training of junior, maybe graduate student psychologists, people reluctant to do psychotherapy, for example, or counseling with someone who's culturally different because they're afraid that they're going to be unethical because they're not competent enough. So they stay on the sidelines. They don't enter in. I'm worried about faculty doing this as well. Well, I don't feel competent enough with that group, whoever it is. My suggestion is that we think more about cultural humility, less about achieving competence as though it's a one-time event and suddenly you're competent with that group, whatever it may be. I think that's a misnomer. Rather, could I be culturally humble and enter my relationships with students with an inquiring sort of approach, recognizing that I don't know a lot. I'd like to hear it from you. What's important culturally for you? Help me understand your experience. This is going to be a mutual learning sort of relationship. I think if we can do that more and talk less about being culturally competent before we mentor, we're going to do a better job of making sure everyone's getting mentored. And then something else I've been thinking about, the M word. This is an interesting idea. Should you as a college professor call yourself a mentor, to somebody who you're working with? And I would say that if you're paired in a mentoring program, that's okay. Both of you know you were paired, mentor-mentee. That means something different. But if a relationship is evolving, I think we need to be careful about calling ourselves a mentor to a student, and especially a culturally different student. Sometimes saying, I'm your mentor, may communicate something about ownership or power and control that we don't want to communicate and could be entirely unintended. So how about this? What if you do the work of being a terrific mentor and then wait for them to call you a mentor at some point and relish those moments when they happen? It's really nice when someone recognizes you as a mentor, but let's let our mentees do that. The other thing I wanted to highlight is when you ask mentees, was your mentor an ally for you? Maybe somebody who was culturally different. They'll often say, well, not so much. And when you ask the mentor, they'll say, oh yeah, I was an ally. And the disconnect seems to be in one part of being an ally. Not being prejudicial and being humble, that's part of it. The other part, though, is taking action when you see social inequity. And mentees are very attuned to this. If you see something going on, don't do anything about it. That communicates something very unfortunate to your mentee. So remember, there are both elements there. The last thing I want to mention, and then just have some questions before we wrap up, is gender And the question about, can men be, very effective mentors for women and vice versa? I think in some STEM disciplines, you have very few women faculty. You have almost all guys serving in professorial roles with students. And they have a really hard time bringing more women into those professions. Part of the issue is men sometimes avoid mentoring women for different reasons. They may not feel confident, they're anxious about it, maybe they have stereotypes about women in these disciplines. There's this brand new book. Oh, it's right here. I just I'll share this as my closing comment. In the last year, I've really had fun working with a sociology colleague on sort of a manual for men about how to approach women in mentoring relationships. And we certainly looked at the literature, looked at the evidence about men in mentorships with women, but then we went out and did a lot of interviews of women, very high-flying women in a number of industries. We have a 4-star Army general and the first 4-star female admiral. We have Sheryl Sandberg. We have CEOs of all kinds of companies. And we have the dean and provost at Knox College. And so these were all informants for us. And we sort of put together, what do guys need to think about? And the stories of the women we talked to were very helpful. So I'll end here, but I'll just give you one example of some. Here's just a few of the elements we cover from some of the chapters in the book. So how about relationships? Many of the women we talked to said, could you just listen? That would be really helpful. Apparently, men have an extra large gene for fixing stuff, and so I'll listen to 2 sentences of what you say and say, okay, here's what you do. Well, that's not really what I wanted from you as a mentor. I really needed you just to kind of hear what I was, and I'll figure it out. I'll get there. So don't tell me what to do. But listen a little bit more. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume what I'll want because I'm a woman in this discipline. We interviewed Janet Petro at NASA, and one of her mentors was Robert Lightfoot. And we talked to Robert Lightfoot. He said, I got into real trouble with this early in my career. I remember being on a selection committee for a very high-ranking job at NASA. The top candidate far and away was a woman. As we're sitting at the selection table in the final meeting, we're all going around, and I give my 2 cents. I said, well, this job requires a lot of travel, and she just had a baby. I don't know if this is going to work. And luckily, a woman was sitting right across the table from him with dagger eyes who said, I think she knows it involves travel, and maybe she knows she had a baby. Let's let her decide that. And it's a good just lesson. Don't make gendered assumptions about what your students might want to do for a career, not want to do. Again, that archaeology metaphor, you need to get to know them and figure that out, but be careful about assumptions. Interestingly, being honest and direct was an issue. Several of the women we talked to said, my mentor pulled his punches. He was kind of gentle in a way that disadvantaged me. I saw him being very direct and clear with his male mentees, and it was helpful. They needed to have that correction, but for me, they kind of held back. And I thought that I missed out on some challenge and other kinds of things that I could have really benefited from. So guys have got to be aware of that. Affirming she belongs, often women, and I'm going to say in STEM disciplines or male-centric academic disciplines where you have very few women, may already feel like imposters. They don't think they belong here. Your job, a big part of your job, is to let them know they do belong, and no mistake was made in granting them admission, and you have to go out of your way often to do a bit more of that. I'll just jump down to the last. We'll certainly be attuned to outside perceptions. How does this look if it's a male-female relationship? We can't pretend that people aren't watching and we're not under a magnifying glass. That does tend to happen everywhere. And then the last one, it's okay if she cries. I was sort of surprised with this one. I wasn't expecting it, but several of the women we interviewed said, don't freak out if I cry occasionally, or if that just happens. Tears aren't toxic and you're not going to melt. Guys get uncomfortable with tears, and my hypothesis is that has something to do with why they're not very direct or honest sometimes, or maybe afraid of the response. Last story, Dana Bourne, Air Force General, talked about this. She said, occasionally passion for me comes with tears, and when I get really passionate about something at work, well, I worked for a general at one point who saw me cry and he was clearly uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do. And from that point forward, whenever he asked my advice, he would say, now, Dana, unemotionally, what do you think about this? So always with that unemotionally caveat. And it communicated to me that it wasn't okay for me to kind of be who I was and occasionally have tears if that seemed appropriate or that was my response. Okay, so I'll stop there with gender. A lot more we could talk about, but do we have just a couple of minutes for interaction, or do we need to run down? What? Near wrap up. Okay, I'm being told shepherd's hook, get off the stage. So let the feast begin. I hope you enjoy your conference. Yeah.